Hi, this is Mikey D, and this is the latest look at RetroRig 0.8.0. It's the latest, I guess you could say, stable release, and a lot of the underwork has changed, and we have a Unity launcher here, nice little Mario pipe with an R on it for RetroRig, I guess, or you could do a Team Rocket. We have a desktop icon here that is placed regardless of language, thanks to JC with the XDG environment variables. So don't mind the Q joypad off to the right here. So I just wanted to go through some of the setup here. And I'll put our password. And a little banner here. Now the biggest thing that's going to be noticeable here in the settings, if you go to the gamepad types, there's now differentiation between 360 wireless and wired, because there is a difference in some of the back end. And we have the Sony PS3 DualShock 3 6-axis Bluetooth, and I'm working on getting the USB added in here, but a lot of people use the Bluetooth modules, which I will add a wiki link in under the gamepad section somewhere that kind of notes. I think it's you have to have a Bluetooth module version 2, and out of the box a lot of dongles work, but there's some that do not work. So you can swap between these. It's best to reboot after you change these, but I think the Sony will actively change on the fly. So we'll exit that. And now the backup existing and restore first run configs, those are still kind of work in progress. I should label those beta. And the enable XPM session here is going to be beta pretty much indefinitely until I can work out some things. It's kind of quirky without handles. Certain things could be how I'm calling it in the script. So we can back out here. And I did remove the start RetroRig because it does auto boot by itself, and if you go into your startup applications, if you want it not to auto start, you could turn that off and just uncheck the RetroRig here. Do not uncheck the Q joypad auto start. I figured it's not that bad, and the fact that we're running a sudo kind of it's a lot easier just to handle it outside of this with the desktop icons and everything. But you will notice that that is missing. So if we exit out here and jump into RetroRig, and I'll go through a few things here. Now the biggest change is thanks to JC contributor that jumped on board here on the project. There is hot plugging gamepad support for the supported gamepads, which what that means is if your this is characteristic of PS3 gamepads. If your PS3 controller goes to sleep and you go to turn it back on, you'll notice normally, at least as of today, it will not work once you turn it back on. There used to be, I believe, hot plugging support in previous versions of XBMC, but in the current Gotham 13.1, that doesn't work. So we cobbled together a patch version of XBMC's XBMC bin, and it allows hot plugging with helper scripter 2, and we recompiled it. So if you turn it off, turn it back on, it'll still work. Any issues with this, just of course submit a normal issues ticket. So a lot of the settings, a lot of this stuff is normally is going to be around the same home screen. So wanted to go through, before we head into there, I was going to show you, let's see here. Now if we start from the desktop, but I want to show one of the supported emulators that before I get into RetroRig is if we go to /user /bin /ppss ppsdl. It's an annoyingly long binary name, but that's how it is from the project. We start that up. Now the default settings, if you go into the settings of this PSP emulator under graphics, the default rendering resolution is on 1x. I test this on a low-end computer, and I wanted to keep it low at the start so that people who wanted to use this on an older computer can still play PSP games. But if you have a large screen and a capable graphics card, you can go ahead and bump this either to Auto 1.1, and all of this is explained on the wiki, or it should be soon. You can bump that up by numeric or just do Auto 1:1, which I believe scales with your screen, if I understand that right. And if you also go down here a little bit, you can change the upscale level in the same way, auto or numerically. And the upscale type you can change, but the default should be fine. And the anisotropic filtering, you can leave at 16x, which is completely fine. I think, yeah, that is the highest. So you can change those a lot around if you have a higher end PC, but we're going to go ahead in here and check out some new stuff. Now there are some times where you go to hit start on your RetroRig and it does pause, so you'll have to exit RetroRig and go back into it. I'm trying to find out. I think it's a skinning issue, but I'm actively working on that with JC as well. So if we go into RetroRig here, now normally the MAME artwork does not show up, even this background here. I added that, and there is a link on the wiki to help get you to the ROM collection browser page that tells you how to get the artwork in. It's a huge file, and it's 800 megs, I think, of artwork if you get it all, and that's just the box front, which is what you're seeing here. So normally it's just a description for the MAME stuff. A new emulator was added was Neo Geo CD. Neo Geo CDZ, I think, is the code word for it. You will need BIOS files, and that's noticed when you go to install. You'll see that, and that's documented on the wiki as well. So we also, I don't know if this was in the last release, TurboGrafx 16, and I also added Game Boy Advance here. And there's not a ROM in place here, but I also added Sega Genesis because I realized, stupidly enough, that Sega Master System, with the old buttons, and there's also Sega Genesis with the 6-button gamepad is enabled. I did change the online scrapers for for a lot of the Game Boy things here, because a lot of the scrapers, they pull in images, but they're like corrupt or something. That I have a ticket in with the ROM collection browser dev. The scraper I changed to, there's one that actually does work, which you're seeing the for Super Circuit and Fusion here. Will pull in the correct. So that's by default, and that should work for the Game Boy Advance titles. And then we have the PSP here, Ridge Racer. Now there's a lot of control reworkings, so you want to check out the gamepads section under either the 360 or PS3 layouts. Make sure you take a look at those. A lot of people can figure them out, but there is changes to that, the MAME and MES emulators. So, for instance, if you go to Aero Fighters, see if this launches here. You'll notice for MAME and MES, the R2 on the PS3 and on the 360, I believe it's the trigger as well, will pull up the configure menu. So even if you have trouble with the player 2 to player 4 controls, you can go in here and also input them if they're messed up. Submit an issues ticket to me and I'll try and correct them. It's kind of tough to set up some of these things ahead of time, the controls, so it's going to be a work in progress for quite some time. And the L2 on PS3 and the other trigger on Xbox will pause the emulators. And that's on MAME and MES. Oops. So we go back in here. Now, one other big change that I did do, and the best example is on Sonic the Hedgehog, as well as the Game Boy Color game here. So if we go into Sonic, wrong ROM there. The Hedgehog 2 for the Game Gear, which the Game Gear is another new emulator I added. You notice the OpenGL, as long as your graphics card supports it, it should run. The shaders and scalars were bumped up just a little bit so that the textures are smoothed out, because they're really blocky. You'll notice on the front screen it is a little smoothed out here. And what that does, if you're on a larger screen, it should shade or smooth some things out. And normally it'd be very, very pixelated, because the Game Gear originally was on a very, very small screen. And you'll notice Sonic here is a little smoothed out, and it's good. It has good and bad parts to it with some of the graphics, and it will be a work in progress until I can get things kind of refined the way they should. So other changes here. See if there's anything else. Super Mario 64, N64 support was in. So the shaders are a big thing. Added consoles on the wiki, especially PSP, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, um, TurboGrafx 16, and Neo Geo. And I want to include basically a good set of maybe 10 consoles that would be the best, and maybe have an option to add in more later on, just so that when you press left on the D-pad in XBMC, you'll see the how you can sort all the ROMs here. And I don't want to end up with 25 different consoles here. They have to scroll forever. So I may make that an option later to add in additional ones, kind of like in the settings menu. So that's the latest edition, and the ROM collection browser here may change in the beta. The skin dev for the dev for the skin that I use in XBMC, he's making some changes that will make this look a little bit different, and we'll see how that goes. So this is 0.8.0 of RetroRig, and if you have any issues, please submit them on GitHub. Also on irc.freenode.net, there is the RetroRig-dev for dev channel that you can join and chat around, or you can hit libregeek.org and hit the contact page there, or follow me on any of the social networks. This is Mikey D, and this is the latest build of RetroRig.